The biggest insurance frauds in history never needed a weapon. A homeless man in the Bronx kept returning to the same bar after men around him had insured his life. A cotton mill burned while thousands of pounds of coverage hung over its machinery. And one murder case unraveled because a landlord mailed 2 newspaper clippings to Scotland Yard. The man who wouldn't die. Tony Marino kept one regular's tab open no matter how much he drank. By July 1932, Marino and several accomplices had turned that generosity into the first step of a plan, taking out life insurance on a homeless man named Michael Malloy so that his death, not his company at the bar, became the thing worth paying for. Wood alcohol didn't touch him, neither did the cold or a car that hit him at speed and left him with nothing worse than a cough. Malloy kept returning to Marino's the next morning every time, ordering his usual. In February 1933, the group finally succeeded, and a doctor friend signed a death certificate for lobar pneumonia. Metropolitan Life paid $800, roughly $20,000 today. The other policies triggered scrutiny instead of another payout, and investigators traced Malloy's real identity under the false name he had been buried with. Marino, Pasqua, Kreisberg, and Murphy were convicted of first-degree murder. All 4 went to the Sing Sing electric chair in June and July 1934, more than a year after Malloy died for a plan that needed 5 separate attempts to work. The 100-pound fire. Salem Mill and New Mills ran on cotton dust, tired machinery, and someone else's money. Royal Exchange Assurance had insured the machinery and contents for more than 3,000 pounds, roughly 325,000 pounds now, covering equipment as if it were new, while years of wear had left it worth far less. A fire in April 1799 nearly destroyed the mill, and a second suspicious blaze followed that May. By February 1800, the insurer was still offering a reward for information, and in March, a laborer named John Matthew Jackson was charged over the fires. Testimony that pointed straight at the mill's owner, Edward Bauer. At Derby Assizes, the court convicted Bauer of deliberately burning his own property to defraud his insurer. The sentence was a 100-pound fine, worth roughly 10,000 pounds today, plus 12 months in prison, a modest bill for destroying a building meant to run for decades. The case against him did not come from a chemist or an inspector. It came from a man who knew exactly what had happened and eventually said so. The Fire Brigade's best customer. London Salvage Corps existed to put out fires and salvage goods for the insurers who paid its wages, not to catch the people setting them alight. Leopold Harris ran a fire insurance fraud ring worth about £500,000 a year, worth tens of millions today, and later testified in court that he had nearly every Salvage Corps officer in his pocket. Captain Brymore Miles had fought in the First World War and still wore the military cross when he walked into burning warehouses the insurers trusted him to inspect. For years, he collected £25 a month, worth roughly £2,300 today, to overlook fires that any trained eye should have questioned. A monthly bribe smaller than a single week's takings from the blazes it protected. A jury at Old Bailey Court found Miles guilty of corruption and conspiring to pervert the course of justice. He was sentenced to 4 years, Harris to 14. The medals on Miles's chest had certified his courage in the trenches. They never explained the £25 a month that certified his silence. The ship that sank on schedule. Every insurer in Liverpool took a ship owner's word that his vessel was seaworthy. In 1866, the men who stood to profit from the Severn made sure that trust was worth nothing. Thomas Berwick owned the ship, Lionel Holdsworth arranged and brokered its insurance, and Charles Webb served as her mate. The Severn and her cargo were insured for about £17,000, worth well over £2 million today, though witnesses at the trial valued the real ship and goods at barely a third of that figure. An old vessel insured far above its working worth made sinking her more profitable than delivering her, so when the Severn went down at sea, prosecutors accused Webb of deliberately casting her away while Berwick and Holdsworth stood trial as the men who had arranged to profit from it. All 3 were convicted. Berwick and Holdsworth each received 20 years penal servitude and were transported to a colony in Western Australia. Webb received 10. The 2 men who never set foot on deck ended up crossing the very ocean they had tried to turn into someone else's loss. A very unlucky kind of wife. A death that looks like an accident once is bad luck. 3 times is a pattern. Between 1912 and 1914, 3 of George Joseph Smith's wives drowned in their bath within days of changing a will or naming him as beneficiary. Smith married repeatedly under different names. Marriage vows are supposed to outlast a honeymoon. Alice Burnham's lasted 5 weeks before her policy paid out, a £500 sum worth about £75,000 today, that named Smith as her husband and beneficiary. She was found dead in a boarding house bath in Blackpool. A landlord named Joseph Crossley noticed 2 newspaper notices describing nearly identical deaths and mailed the clippings to Scotland Yard. Detective Inspector Arthur Neal traced both notices back to the same man under different aliases and arranged a controlled bathtub demonstration to test whether a drowning like that could really leave no evidence of a struggle. It could. Jurors convicted Smith of murder after a short deliberation, and he was hanged in August 1915. The minister who swam away. John Stonehouse left his clothes neatly folded on a Miami beach in late 1974, then waded into the water and let everyone assume the rest. Before he vanished, his wife Barbara had arranged a series of large life insurance policies covering him and their children, reported at more than $200,000, worth about $2 million today. Stonehouse surfaced weeks later in Melbourne, living under a dead constituent's name and starting a new life with his secretary. Investigators spent months untangling the finances of the failing companies he had left behind in Britain. Australian police grew suspicious of an Englishman moving large sums using 2 separate aliases, and newspapers later claimed one early theory was that they had stumbled onto the vanished Lord Lucan. It wasn't Lucan. Stonehouse stood trial at the Old Bailey for 68 days, defended himself without a lawyer, and was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, theft, and deception, including an attempt to defraud insurers over his own drowning. He was sentenced to 7 years for a plan that only unraveled because police looked twice at the wrong Englishman. £30 a head. By 1781, English law valued a captive African the same as a coil of rope, not as a person the crew was responsible for keeping alive. In December of that year, the captain of the Zong tested exactly how far that logic could go. A navigational error had added weeks to the crossing and left the ship short on drinking water. So over several days, well over 130 enslaved men and women were forced into the sea, valued in the insurance policy at £30 a head, worth around £7,000 each today. When the insurers refused to pay, a first jury sided with the ship's owners and treated the deaths as a covered loss. Granville Sharp, a British abolitionist, tried to bring murder charges against the crew and was refused, so he made sure the case became public record instead. The King's Bench later set that verdict aside and ordered a new trial, but no retrial ever followed, and the owners never collected on a policy written for people the law still called freight. The ruling narrowed what counted as an unavoidable loss at sea, and it became one more fact abolitionists like Sharp put in front of a public that had never had to look at the arithmetic before. The husband who came back. A wrecked canoe on a northeast England beach was the only evidence anyone had that John Darwin had drowned. In March 2002, he made sure everyone believed exactly that. Buried in mortgage debt across a dozen properties, he vanished at sea in a canoe accident that had never actually happened, and his wife Anne collected on his life insurance and 2 pensions. Pensions and life insurance are supposed to support a family after someone is truly gone. The Darwins simply skipped the part where he actually died. He spent years hidden in a next-door bedsit the couple owned, just steps from their own house, while the world believed he was dead. The insurance alone came to about £250,000, worth close to twice that in today's money. The scheme held until an anonymous woman found a photograph of John and Anne house hunting in Panama through a simple online search and sent it to both Cleveland police and the Daily Mirror. That single image broke the story open. Darwin walked into a London police station that December claiming amnesia. Both he and Anne were convicted of fraud the following July, undone not by a forensic breakthrough or a slipped alibi, but by a photo neither of them knew existed until it was already in a detective's hands. Which case surprised you most? Tell us in the comments and subscribe for the next one.